Welcome, my name is Scott Melbourne. I am the director of the Schneider Museum of Art, part of the Oregon Center for the Arts at SOU. Please note that I have you all on mute, and please keep your Zoom on mute until we get to the Q&A at the end. You may use the chat section of your Zoom to enter any questions you may have. I will monitor the chat section, and questions may be saved for the end of the talk when we open up for questions for everybody. Our special guest today is Malia Jensen, who lives and works in Portland, Oregon. And a little bit about Malia. Malia transforms familiar forms and subjects into poignant reflections on the human condition. Her diverse studio practice encompasses sculpture, video, and photography. Their work is informed by an interest in natural cycles and the fragility of the constructed systems we use to navigate the world. Malia's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally at such places like the Melbourne International Arts Festival in Australia, Portland Institute Contemporary Art, and the Portland Art Museum, both in Portland, Oregon, Tacoma Art Museum in Washington, the New Museum in New York, Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design in Wisconsin, and many more. Malia has completed multiple residencies, such as the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, the Ucross Foundation, Headlands Center for the Arts, and more. She has spoken at many colleges and universities across the country. She has completed several public commissions in the Northwest, and her work is held in numerous public and private collections. Malia is represented by the Cristin Tierney Gallery in New York and Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland. To start, Malia, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And how have you been faring in these pandemic times?
If it were a mere pandemic, you mean that this world and global upheaval? It's incredible. It's an overwhelming time to be an artist because you always, I think as an artist, you're supposed to affect something from sometimes an intuitive level, and sometimes it's some cosmic emotional fixing in a way that I've always thought of my work, at least. So there's just so much to fix right now. It's hard not to be overwhelmed, but we keep going.
Well, I'm glad that you're healthy and that you are.
Yeah, no, all that said, I am very well and incredibly fortunate I'm feeling lucky.
Thank you. And thank you for participating in our exhibition titled Celebrating Wild Beauty, which puts a spotlight on the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument located in Southern Oregon and Northern California. The exhibition is online, a virtual exhibition only due to COVID-19. And your ambitious project, Near Nature, Worth Your Salt, is what we have on view in the exhibition. Can you tell us a bit about it and begin with the inception of this project? And to do so, I'll now make you a host so that you can share your screen with everyone.
So then I go, did you just do that for me?
I did.
Okay.
So now you might be able to share your screen.
Share my screen, yes. Okay. I'm starting with kind of a beginning here because this is oh well. So I think you're seeing an image of a bunch of breasts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to, so this work, I started these projects carving salt in 2010, basically. And this group of, the first things I started making were a series of breasts that I was creating to make a video at a ranch in New Mexico, where I was offering this breast to the cattle at this ranch. And I am still trying to make this full screen, which should not be as hard as it is for me. In any case, I'll continue and I'll figure that out. So the this work, created a video of the cattle eventually interacting with the salt. So in that work, I was interested in the sort of diplomacy at cross purposes of me making something out of salt, which the cattle would obviously be drawn to. And the way I think of it as diplomacy is the sort of mutual satisfaction at cross purposes. Mm-hmm. So 10 years later, and I included this work because when I was living in New York for 10 years and starting in 2003, I made this bear and put this animal out in urban space. So taking that wild into the city. So moving back to Oregon, one of the reasons why I began this project, Nearer Nature, which I owe the support of to the Oregon Community Foundation, was I really wanted to get out into our state and into the environment that I so missed being in the city, being in New York. So starting to work on this whole body idea of making the salt. So this was the carving of the salt foot.
And this is for the Nearer Nature.
Now we're switching to Nearer Nature.
And this began a year ago?
This began actually more than a year ago now. So the carving of the salt works is pretty time consuming. So that was the beginning of the work in the studio, spending the time doing the carving, which, as you can see, there's a hammer and chisel and whatnot about. For the foot, I made a study of my foot in clay because it was very hard to see my foot while I was carving the salt, which is pretty challenging. And then there's a set of donuts. I'll show you an image that kind of encapsulates the project. Brancusi head, which I think Scott's pretty fond of. And so here's the sort of overall vision of the piece, which forms, as you can see, a head, two hands. This is in your Ashland area. The donuts, which is in Central Oregon, it represents the stomach. The breast, which is in Tye Valley, and the foot, which is in Eastern Oregon. So across the state, it created a collage of a reclining body. With the implication being that we, as the state, as the people, we are the body, the politics acts upon, the natural environment acts upon and affects, and we affect. So in a sense, part of my mission for it was to, I'm going to go back to that first slide, that slide, was to create a conversation and a dialogue across the regions and across different interests, different human interests, different populations, with the commonality that we all walk on this shared earth. And so trying to figure out where I was going to be placing these pieces was a part of the project. So I would, after finishing the carving, kind of put a piece in my car and head to the coast, as the case with this hand, which is Nehalem, and connect with a friend who knew somebody. You should talk to the Nehalem Community Land Trust. So I got to know the Nehalem Community Land Trust, which has been doing really good work preserving the estuary and preserving other land tracts that they are working within a trust area. So they were really cool. So they let me place it on their property with 3 cameras. And the head is just off the Tualatin Hills outside of Portland. And there's a very large elk herd that lives in this area, which is kind of amazing. Most people would see this footage and think, where were you? Where was this? But it was just outside of Portland. So that was an interesting, people don't know what lives in the woods right next to their homes. So to sort of be able to show people that, and I think that to sensitize people to the wildness that they're so close to. The hand is obviously in Ashland. So Ryan Kitson, who Scott introduced me to, who's been fantastic, he helped me place the hand down there. And this is so for this piece, it's in the Tye Valley, and I had met a rancher through another friend, and then So it just got into these interesting, complicated relationship building projects on a human level. This is at the coast in Nehalem, so I'm setting the camera within the root slab of this tree. So this is the estuary that the land trust has under their, well, you know, if you have national monument status, there's different levels of protection and different ways to protect the land. So a land trust is one way. And this is the guy who was on the board and one of the founders of the trust, and who is working with the different communities to try and get lands under conservation. This is Tiff Harker, my project manager, who towards the end of the project, I coaxed her out to the coast and she checked a camera with me. So this is a little bit, you would see my routine every month. I would, once the cameras were set across the state on all of the pieces, there were in total between 12 and 16 cameras going at a time. So I was getting in my car every weekend and going out and checking the projects. So this would be a typical, once a month I would go make this trek through the swamp and get the cameras. And this is the salt hand that was placed out there. The sprawling nature of the project, I think I'm just going through these images, and it might seem, I think it'll unfold for your viewers' minds as I talk about it. So this was another aspect of the project. Obviously, this is going the opposite direction of the coast, but the driving through the Oregon landscape and being out in the state and being out in areas that I wouldn't have a real compelling reason to be in the landscape is that the landscape is there, but to create a project that dictated that I make all of these circuits around the state, or at least around certain parts of it, with a regularity was quite amazing. And it never ceases to move me, really, to see how beautiful the world that we are surrounded by is.
Sure.
Malia,
you know, you lived in New York City for 10 years.
Yeah.
So have I. And when you're living in New York City, you never go to those tourist attractions. You're not going to the Statue of Liberty. You're not going to the roof of the Empire State Building, yet they are phenomenal sites.
Right. So there's a bit of that when we all, I think that's your implication. It's like, well, I don't just drive to Sisters because it's beautiful. So, and this is on, it's also, there's elements of, like, this is on BLM land near Terrebonne, near Sisters, Oregon, near Bend. And this is the foot that's in Joseph, all the way in Eastern Oregon. This is a rancher who let me put, John Justison, who let me put the piece on his family ranch land in Tye Valley, and he's a really interesting character. And that was, so this is the landscape that I would be driving through to get to the Tye Valley, which kind of became a central spot because it literally, it's close to the center of the state, and it also, this is just off the road, off not 197 South. This hat, incidentally, I would wear sometimes if I was, thinking maybe I was driving too fast and whatever, questionable police officers might pull me over. I had my American flag hat on, which I found at the bottom of Immigrant Lake when I was down there. So this hat was literally found at the bottom of a dry lake bed. And this is the setup. This is the camera setup. So you're seeing these little signs that I had made when I thought there might be people around that said, cameras here with permission, and a little information on the project if someone wanted to follow it. No one messed with any of the cameras. I had no issues with anything, which was great.
Were you ever contacted by anybody who said, I stumbled upon this salt piece in the woods, or?
Oh, I had a few reviews delivered to me through the cameras. I had a few people sort of wave at the cameras or address the cameras or frown at them. I had one person give me a pretty compelling critique, which was fun. But mostly they left them alone. I did in the video, when it came to making the video, this was an example of, so when I go collect the footage, I'd sort of review what I had, and this was checking the camera. So this bobcat was he just happened to be in this frame that I grabbed, but I had my friend who was helping me with this camera in Central Oregon go out with clippers and sort of weed some things out of the camera that I hadn't been able to see in the footage when I placed it. So
well, really, really interesting to think about. You're not just leaving it and collecting at the end. You are, as an artist, so to speak, like taking this as a process.
Yeah, it's a lot of it. I included these partly because the layers of work for this project were pretty extensive, and like if you have 12 or 16 cameras out, you have to kind of collect the footage. At least I was, in order to sort of map out the arc of the year that I was trying to gather footage for, I would want to collect the data about once a month, which meant that I was pulling the SD cards, the memory cards from each camera and replacing it with a fresh one, taking that back to Portland, downloading the footage, logging all the footage in. So there's, 40,000 30-second clips that actually I should have made a screenshot of my edit organization, because keeping track of the images. Oh, and then other unforeseen things, like for the beginning of this project, my van was breaking down so often, I decided that it was part of my practice. And in this case, I had to hitchhike from a part of Mount Hood where there was no cell reception because my transmission, like my gearing went out in my car anyway. So this was my tow truck driver. He towed me all the way to Portland, like 100-mile tow. Anyway, the sort of adventures that surrounded the project were unending. This is my my edit team, although Ben is really the guy here. I wanted, because I had grant funding, because I felt like I wanted to underscore the community that I was working with. I wanted to bring in people who I so this was my edit assistant team. I basically was trying to expand the project so that I could give a group of people an opportunity to participate in it and to do something that was outside of what their regular lives were. So each of these people had a section of Randall had the coast section. So he would compile in the grid one group of footage, whereas like Llama had the footage from Thai Valley. So she would build that into a grid. This is Tiffany, my project manager. So she's helping me keep track of all of the details. So after I collect the footage, we assemble it into a grid. So we track 1, 2, 3, 4. And each of those sequences is running concurrently. So when you're seeing the footage, I'll go through a series of stills. And then this is a video. So, and this was reshot off my computer screen.
And the cameras pick up audio as well.
Yes, so there's sound. I'm still distracted by this fantasy of there we go. That's better, right? Yeah, so the audio is definitely part of it. And seeing the stills, you're not getting the full image, but I guess Scott and I talked about there's the full, you all listening have access to the full piece. It's in its rough form on my Vimeo page if you want to log into that and see what this looks like moving. So this scene was the first moment when I knew this project was going to work, when I collected this footage after having placed the camera in early May. A month later, went back to gather the footage, and the very next day after I had placed the camera, an elk cow, that's the had given birth just down off the lower frame. So this area of the camera is essentially the living room of this herd of elk. And when you watch it, it has a disarming way of just taking you into a place that we humans are not invited into, with an intimacy that's unfiltered by a kind of grandiose, Magic Planet footage. It's just quotidian animal life, almost mundane. So, and this was partly my hope of the project, was that it wasn't charismatic megafauna or incredible moments. It's just normal life of animals in the world surrounding us. Normal, other than the fact that I've made these sculptures for them. So this is the Brancusi head, very close to Portland. And of course, the other thing about the salt is that it is the way our bodies use salt, and the way an animal body uses salt is as a in the connectivity between the neural system, between the muscle and the brain. So you're, in a way, it's creating connectivity within the body. Mm-hmm. So the layer, the metaphoric layer of this project, creating connectivity in our larger human body, was something that I was interested in. I mean, that obviously I'm not this. It wasn't necessarily like, that's not entirely a coincidence, but I found that in the project, the kind of layers of like the metaphoric content of the project is built into the actual structure of the project. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah. Somehow this one's smaller. So here we're back at the hand in Nehalem. And this herd they weren't as drawn to the salt because they live in a very salty environment. So their diet is pretty rich in salt in the first place. So they visited the salt less frequently than the ones near to Portland. This is in Sisters, Terrebonne. And this was this beautiful bobcat that wandered through with its cubs, and they didn't partake of the salt. Actually, they just marked it territorially. This is the donuts, and we're back at Nehalem.
I love those images.
I know. It's been an interesting process editing all of this footage, because it's so, at this point, so Ben, my editor, and I are still working together. The pandemic obviously has thrown off many schedules, including our finished schedule, because I'm adding an hour to the 5-hour piece that I finished last fall, so that it can encompass winter and spring and the full seasons. But so I'm spending many hours looking at all this. This is another. Oh no! What are you doing? Little piece of footage.
You can hear them, yeah.
Yeah. This is the calves and cows calling out to each other. But I love, that's about the craziest clip. Like, mostly it's not that nuts, but I really like so the other thing that I find very interesting is hearing the acoustics of different areas of the state, like the acoustics of this woods versus the acoustics of Nehalem versus the acoustics of Portland's West Hills, very different. So just that audio made, I think the project in a sense is about slowing down and giving viewers a place and a way to slow down. And the part of my reason for having it be so long and to be 6 hours long, aside of the fact that each quadrant represents 6 hours of footage, because the whole piece is 6 hours long. So together it's a 24-hour amount of time collected over a year's time. So it has this sort of reference to the clock and cycles. I wanted to make it as long as it is because you get bored after a while, and it's creating a space in your head where you're just, the way we used to just stare before we had, I mean, ironically, we're all on screens now, and this is on screens, and so we're seeing nature on screens within screens. But before, we were all stuck on our phones and stuck with screens. People might have sat and watched what the sun go down, or just stared into a vista. Like, we've had this as, I mean, even in your system of national parks and the national monuments, like, the reason we mark off spaces in nature is because it affects how we hold the better parts of ourselves in the world, to be connected to nature. So this is the piece installed at the Riverside restaurant in Maupin. And so leaping forwards, once we completed the edit, in the fall of last year, I installed the video in 12 locations near where I gathered the footage, that were just like, this is a restaurant near where I gathered the footage in Tide Valley. So I had a friend who knew the owner, and I came in and said, hey, I'm doing a project. Would you be interested in hosting the video in your space for 1 or 3 months in the fall? So they usually have this sports screen, and they had another sports screen behind it, but this screen I installed and showed the video there. And these people became regulars, actually. They happened to be in there when I was coming in to photograph the piece, which was great, because they told me that they would come in either 5 days a week. They would come in for lunch, and they would either arrive early or late, so that they could be sure and get that table right up front, so they could sit next to the piece and watch it. That's so cool. that was very gratifying. And people, like, I met a bunch of, like, sort of rancher families who were like, oh, this has been great. My kid loves to sit up there next to it, and we play animal identification. So, and this is also in Tide Valley, in one of my favorite locations. This is a little grocery store that's been there for 100 years. Mm-hmm. And you can see it sort of nested in with their photographs of the elk that are, with a grand rack, and all of the sort of tchotchkes and souvenir items that they have in the store. Really cool store. This is the exterior of the store. So it's also the gas station. It's everything in this town. It's the bulletin board. They have a small restaurant also, but Maupin is the bigger town next door. But Tide Valley General has been the heart of this community for about 100 years.
Wow. And
it was like going in there and asking, like, this to me was about trying to make a relationship with people who might have, like, folded their arms and looked at me like, what do you want, outsider? So building these relationships and underscoring in this part of the project our commonalities was the driving force of a good part of the project. This image is rather small, but I quite like this frame. Okay, driving around. So I think the next group of images is just some images from the road. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I'm very pleased to have gotten some ink in the Nugget, which is the Redmond paper. This shot is a little staged because this is T. Lee Brown, who is the writer of the piece. I asked her to send me some shots, so she was happy to do that.
That's great.
So I also had the piece installed in the Sand Dune Pub in Manzanita, and the Skyline Tavern up here in Portland. This is my team. We had a little reception up there. That was the only place we had any kind of opening. The Skyline loved it. It worked really well up there. So this is another shot at the Riverside. Another shot in the Tide Valley General. And coincidentally, I met in Thai Valley, there's a lodge, like a cabin next to the river where I was placing the piece. And one day when I was up there, there were a bunch of fly fishermen having like a weekend retreat. And they turned out to be basically the leadership team from OHSU. So I met these fantastic scientists and doctors, and Dr. Susan Hayflick was really interested in the piece. And so we ended up installing it at OHSU. So then the piece ran within the medical community and within the offices of molecular and molecular biology and genetics and molecular biology. Wow. So that's been a super interesting relationship to have formed too with these scientists, and especially now as we have these, she's too busy to get together. You might recognize this location. So, and Ryan, so this was Ryan, he set the piece up in the sculpture building at SOU, which was fantastic. So it was facing at night, and this is my friend Heather and Jake's son. Yeah, and they drove through and visited. Okay, actually, I think I have another picture from SOU. So this is in a feed store in Redmond, which also was basically, I kind of went in there and was looking at the sort of salt rocks and started a conversation, and then, hey, I have this project, and they're like, okay. So again, it's just sort of making these funny relationships, and also pushing myself into spaces that I might not have, pushing my own comfort level. When I talked about being in New York, being in the city, and wanting to be out in nature, and like how to, I'm comfortable in nature, but basically strangers to me. So also I don't know if I should dwell on that anymore. I feel like I just cut that sentence off a little bit. Point being, I think we all get stuck in our familiar groups. And you probably less so in academia because you have a flow of people coming and going that you didn't know last year, and now you're getting to know them. Most of my practice as an artist is in my studio. So I tend to be isolated in my work. I am also not involved in the front lines of an academic career, so I don't just meet people without sort of putting some work into it. So kind of stepping out. In this instance, I asked the Nehalem, the Neocani High School if they would like to host the piece, and then we had made a connection with the librarian. So the librarian and I installed the piece in I think it was there for 3 months, and Tiff and I went out and did a lunchtime conversation with the students there, and we just talked about their lives and their relationship to nature, and their relationship to interior and exterior, and that was great. So that was part of the conversation. So here we are. This is you'll know this. You'll know this place. Yeah. So this is Jake and Mark looking at the piece through the window. KS Mocha at King Elementary School here in Portland. I had it installed in this sort of corridor space behind the stage in the library. I don't know how long they kept it running, actually, because I think it was very distracting for the kids. So I don't know if that was, but I was thrilled that they had it there, and once more at Skyline Tavern. So then going back to after I had edited that and placed it in those different locations, or actually probably before that, I was collecting the salt pieces from the locations where I'd had them installed. So this is the worn down salt hand, and kind of coming upon this piece in particular, I realized when I saw it that it was compelling in a different way. So I pulled this piece and I'll show you at the end of this slideshow that I've taken made the salt pieces into cast glass sculptures. So they've become an extension of the project in a slightly ancillary way. So these are the donuts afterwards. And the hand, so this was the thing that got me, obviously. I don't know if you see my cursor. Is that part of my?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so this sort of crazy thread, and this particular piece, I'm sort of doubling down on the questionable act of giving animals a gift, the way humans like to suppose that we're going to take care of them, when in fact what they really would like is if we would just leave. So the sort of hand holding a plum or an offering to an animal in that sort of witchy Hansel and Gretel way, here, take this, you know, this sort of questionable offer, gifts from humans, which are usually come with a terrible backlash. The salt breast, the hand from the other side after I pulled it. And then the next part of the project, the add-on, was taking the pieces. I shipped them to Yucca Valley Materials Lab in Southern California and worked with Michael Endo and Heidi Schwegler. Michael as the primary tech, master glass caster, who used to run the part of Bullseye Glass here in Portland. So this is us. I shipped in the pieces. He made molds before I got down there. We poured waxes. I had 10 days of basically a kind of residency collaboration. And the brown is the wax before it gets cast in glass. So this is some images that he sent me as he was taking the investment off of the glass. So one of the things that I love about this is just you get to see how complicated the process of glass casting is. It's not that different from bronze casting, in that there's an investment. You melt the wax out, and then you, in the case of glass, since it's kiln formed, you're making a funnel around the mold so that the frit that you're loading it with melts into the mold, as opposed to, I think some people might think that you're pouring molten glass into a form. So when someone says it's kiln cast glass, it means that the frit is melting into the mold space. So you have to make these big chambers on top for the glass, for the frit to be held. A little more texture, conversations about texture. The rivulets of the water that had worn down the breast sculpture and the hand. So you also see all of this flashing in the molds that I'm still in the process of tooling. And I should add here that this really, I have a show in August at Elizabeth Leach Gallery, which is these works and a series of photographs that I took, the photographs that were from that you saw, the sort of noir looking photographs. So it's a simple and elegant show of the artifacts from Worth Your Salt.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is the donuts. And I believe this is my last image. Yes. I'm going to stop my screen share. Is that the right move?
Yeah, stop the screen share and make me a host. If you go down to participants.
Okay.
Click on participants and then hover over my name. Make me a host.
Make host.
Yes.
Change host.
And for everybody who is now viewing, if you click on the chat, so if you scroll over the Zoom screen, click on chat, you'll see that our office manager, Emily McPeck, has shared the Vimeo link, the 6-hour video by Malia and her team with the password, Jensen at SOU, to view. And I would like to also note that when you are doing a Zoom and sharing your screen, when the host is playing a video, the participants, what we are hearing is the microphone of your computer picking up the audio. So even though we heard it, we heard it in a very faint way. So I strongly encourage everyone to go to the link, watch the video. And what's great about the Vimeo is that you can pick and choose the different sections you want to watch, and you can find the different forms of life and see what audios happen. So I just wanted to point that out. And we are opening it up for questions from anyone. If you want to type in the chat, I will read the questions aloud. If you want to speak with Malia, we can unmute you.
I should add, Scott, that what's up on the Vimeo right now was our sort of rough edit from the long version from that I put up when I had a conversation with the Portland Art Museum. So it's not the complete version, and it might have shortchanged a little bit of the Ashland footage. So when the final piece is fully finished, I will add that piece to the link. But so this one is a little bit rougher than the final.
And during the conversation, there was one item I kept being reminded about from our conversations. So you applied for Oregon Community Foundation Creative Heights.
Yes.
And at that time, they rarely gave it to individual artists, correct?
That is correct.
Organizations. And they're very generous grants.
Yeah, it was incredible.
One of the catalysts was for you to, as you kept saying, to get out of the studio, get out, about, meet, connect, and make that work and bring it out into the community. Seems like it was beyond successful of everything you've been able to do.
I hope that's true. And I think one of the things that has been, and I think I talked to the kids at Neoconi High School, someone asked, like, what was, the hardest part of this project? And I think one of the hardest parts are following and maintaining all of these new relationships that I've made. Like, I literally want to be in all of these places and having all of these conversations. So I'm actually still sort of working on this, particularly now at this amazing, incredible, and overwhelming time of, pandemic, racial upheaval, heightened awareness, like mind-blowingly heightened awareness of the inequities of our culture, like wanting to be like, okay, how can I go into these places again with deepened conversations and maintain them and stay in touch with the people that I have met, so that, I feel like if we all know, the whole project is a giant empathy building project. And I continue to want to find ways to deepen that impact.
Great. And in the chats, we have a comment. Your work is beautiful, and the context of the work is fascinating. I would thought that the work reminded me of the work of Brancusi. Any chance he was an influence on your sculpture work?
Of course, yes. I love Brancusi, and I love the head is literally what's the other word besides rip off? Like it is like a copy of, and it's Sleeping Muse, which then there's a double irony of, like, he's my muse and I'm copying his muse. So I always love the sort of like layers of almost of wordplay in the piece.
And so I know that your family, your father was a ceramicist, correct? And so you've been working with your hands a very long time. From the talent that you have with the salt licks, the lifelike, the almost hyper real touch of that. Is this something that you feel as though it just has been part of your life? Did you?
I think that's an interesting thing, because even when I went to school, I went to PNCA in like 30 years ago, and I have a BFA in painting. So I didn't even really study sculpture, but it was very clear to me that when I finished school, I'd always worked in construction. I'd done stuff. I always worked with my hands, and I feel like I think with my hands, even as a kid, my strengths were not academic. So and my whole family, like from even just the the kind of hand labor. My mom's father was a bricklayer, and a farmer. You know, my dad was a potter. My mom is very skilled. Her embroidery is insane. Like, she is a very crafty person and a good artist herself. So I feel like my natural place is through my hands. So yeah, I would say there's a naturalness to it.
And as the editing of this project is, you're seeing the finish line, so to speak, and you have an exhibition lined up just over a month away in Portland. I know that when artists are going through that exhibition coming up, you have blinders on, and you're really focused. What do you see after the exhibition?
Well, it's interesting because I really actually feel like I want to do more work around environmental justice. I want to do more work around community-focused projects that might not necessarily have to do with art, but that I might be able to open doors because of the work I do as an artist. So I'm interested in that work. I'm also working and Candace, who's in the group here too, we're working with particularly my New York gallery on creating some opportunities to upload the piece online to make it available now more broadly. So fingers crossed that works out, and hopefully that will be through Portland and another institution. After this, well, projects just sort of do beget other projects, as you know. I feel like I have a little bit of, I want to take some time to do some writing.
Mm-hmm.
If it's about politics, if it's about art, if it's about how art situates itself in our political realm. I'm working on some other projects. I'm working on a fundraising project for PNCA right now, which I'm excited about. And it's a big collaborative drawing project. So
I think the writing idea is fantastic, because after being, so deep into this project for so long, there's probably so much to unpack, getting out of the studio, making those connections. I know it was very important for you to show the artwork in unusual, non-typical art spaces and public spaces. I'm sure there's a lot for you to.
There's so much. And even so, I was, if you could see the screen, the desktop behind this sort of cleaner image that I showed you, I could spend a year organizing all of the threads of this project and the various aspects of it. It's a little overwhelming, but yeah. So hopefully I'll take that time to do some writing.
That sounds great. And I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. Okay. Last chance for anybody who would like to pose any questions. If not, this video is being recorded. We will eventually get it up onto the museum's website so everybody could revisit, share, email links out. I would like to just finish by saying, Malia, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
I have one question from Candace, and Dawn popped up to give me a better word than ripoff. She said replica. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. Candace wanted to know if there was an aspect of this project that was either really surprising or unanticipated. And I guess to that, and I love that question, and I get that in different iterations often, like, what was the most surprising thing you saw? And I don't know if I didn't know what I would get. So in that sense, it was all surprising or it was all unanticipated. One of the things that I also like to think about is with surveillance, and with all of this was surveillance in the natural world. And one of the things I think about with that as I hope it comes in at a sort of gut level, that people can imagine what they're not seeing. So when you see that those cameras capture this discrete space, what's just out of frame? What are we missing? What are we not seeing? And that is a kind of maybe harder to access. You have to kind of dig in there for that. But that to me is an underlying message about culturally, personally, familially, what are we not seeing? What are we missing that's just outside of our personal frame of reference or the camera's narrow focus? So that's sort of
yeah, I think that's a question
the depth of it.
Artists, particular sensibilities, often ask themselves, what is not there. There's another question in the comments. Would you like me to read, or would you? I'll read it. Okay. There is an obvious sensual aspect to the sculptures and their animal relationship to the objects. There is that aspect that changes the relationship between animals and humans, that they are engaging with one another, even if only a human image, but it changes the usual predator-victim history between the animals and their creatures. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons I wanted to give this sort of parts of this human form to the animals was it's in a way that they disregard the human form. It doesn't mean anything to them. It's just like they're there because it's the salt. We are an insignificant. Ideally, we would be even more insignificant in the life of the animals. So the kind of disregard, like we're a tiny little bit of this world in an ideal place. As it is, we are far too influential. What was the other? And the sensuality, absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of the core of my personal work is, and it's part of the relationship with hands in the first place, just being in your body and being in a kind of sensual, earthy space of being in the world, not just in your intellect, but in your physical space, in your physical being. And that I feel like is threatened by our digital age. And even weirdly now, we're even so much more distant from real human contact or connections. And the whole overlay of this happening now, I could never do this project. I couldn't do this project this year, of course, not at all. So I was incredibly lucky in that realm. Does that answer the question, I think?
Yeah, that's from
okay.
Alan. Hi, Alan.
Okay.
If there's any other final questions, you can type them in. I would like to remind everybody that the Vimeo link that Malia is providing with the password will be available up through the weekend, probably till Monday morning. So take a look, enjoy. Malia, thank you so much. Always enjoy working with you and visiting your studio when I'm in Portland. Love the work so much. You are very talented.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
I love working with you and working with SIU.
Thank you, Malia. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.